Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's podcast interview. I'm so excited to be here today with Veronika Illiana. I recently found her on Facebook and I was really resonating with some of her posts on polarity. So I just had to have her on and share her wisdom with all of you guys. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's totally an honor. I also have been loving reading what you shared. There have been multiple things where I was like, yes, I wish I had worded it like that. And I'm actually just really excited to have this conversation. I feel like I've had these conversations with my private clients, with my friends in intimate settings, but not yet in a recorded setting. And I know that these subjects we're going to touch on are on a lot of people's hearts right now. So I'm really excited to dive in with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into. To start out, could you kind of just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, your story, how you got into the work that you do?
For sure. So I run a coaching business. I've worked with a really wide variety of people. I actually always have a hard time answering this question. So I love that we're just going to get it out of the way right away. I would say that the foundation of my work is helping people come back to their instincts and be able to really discover who they are underneath all the layers of like programming and like distortion, added layers that aren't really theirs. So allowing them to shed that, to like deprogram themselves, release what's not theirs, and then discover what their true values are, what their true like nature is, like really essentially remembering who they are. And then there's the process of like helping them actually step into that in their lives in a very practical way, which can be harder if when people have been living like out of sync with their instincts for a long period of time. There can be like a process of transforming, coming back like home to the heart, home to the instincts, and building from there. So um, yeah, how did I get into it? I actually started with hosting grief workshops. So I have three sons. I had a fourth son who died as an infant. He was 3 days old. And about 5 years after that experience, I started hosting grief workshops. And through those grief workshops, I really realized that the like my gift in those workshops was actually helping people step into building the life that they wanted to lead. Like they were actually called gifts of grief. And this is the experience that I observe over and over again with grief and trauma and like essentially is seeing where people are like, okay, that was not what I wanted. What am I here to experience as a human being in this short lifetime? And those were the moments I loved most in those workshops. And that naturally led into one on one work with people. And it's been an ever going evolution since then. My work is still evolving, it's still very young. So,
That's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of incredible how much grief can shift your life and put things, I guess it puts the brevity of life into perspective and how you really do start to ask yourself, well, like, how do I want to live? And it can be a huge turning point.
Yeah, 100%. I would say for me, it was like a second, not a second chance, but it was when I came out of that experience, I felt like I re-chose living because I spent about 6 months like not wanting to be here. Like I had lots to live for, like beautiful children, all of that, but the heaviness of the grief was like unbearable at times, and I just wanted to like check out and not exist. And when I came through that and was on the other side, I remember like going for a walk one night and looking up at the stars and talking to God. And I was like, okay, like I'm back, I'm like 2 feet in on this human experience. Like, let's go, sign me up. And it was, I mean, I think back to that moment and like saying those words, I think back to it often because since then I've lived so much as well. But like, wait, not quite that much. No, I'm just kidding. But I remember being like, I'm here for it. I want to experience being human. Let's go. Like, and
Um,
it was actually probably a more powerful prayer than I realized at the time, or commitment. Yeah.
yeah. Wow, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
One of the posts that I really resonated with, you were talking about how we all receive imprinting in childhood that influences our relationships and how we show up in the world. It's like basically our blueprint. And you teach that we can recreate ours, but it's not only a mental thing, it requires somatic shifts and unconscious mind reprogramming. How do you help your client? I absolutely agree. I think mindset work is a little bit of it, like it's like maybe 5%, but there's a huge amount of work that we need to do somatically and in the body. So how do you help your clients with this?
So one of the yeah, they're depending on the person and how they are presenting, there's different ways that I'll go about it, and usually it's a combination. So there is that like level of like understanding with your mind, but then if you can go into a lot of the most like potent imprinting that people has or have is like from um heightened moments or experiences where it was like too much for them to process at that time. And
Uh,
so part of it is like going back to that experience, and then like usually what happens in those experiences is they disconnect from their instincts, or they disconnect from their heart, or like they shut down the most beautiful part of themselves. So it's like going back there and letting that part be safe to come back and shine and be like integrated as part of them. And so that can be done through different things. Like there's working on a cellular level, which is like a guided journey that I take people on where we're like going to the stars and meeting with like different versions of themselves and like being guided through this very like healing experience. That can be one way. Another way is story work. So like working with the story, the words, because most of these stories are also it's like a story that people have been telling repeatedly without actually ever like shifting the story and like taking their power back. And so going through a story while checking in with the body. So like keep it's like the process is essentially bringing them back to their body and moving the energy and the emotion around. And really, it's just like creating an experience where they get to be seen, see themselves, witness themselves, feel the pain, feel the feelings
yeah.
in a safe and empowered situation. And then it's phenomenal. Like I've been guided through this as well, but it's phenomenal like how much you can alchemize or move through like pain or trauma that you were like, oh, that's never gonna move. Suddenly it's like instead of it being a place of contraction in the body, it's a place of expansion and like light and yeah, anyways.
That's how do you help like when somebody truly was a victim, like truly helpless, like not just a made up story about being a victim, but like they were a child or they were assaulted. Like, how do you help somebody to rewire that and come into their power around that kind of a story?
A big part of that is going back um to be with that like that version of themselves. So it's essentially like creating a relationship with
Yeah.
um, that version of themselves and going. And I actually will take people on journeys where they recreate what happened. Like they essentially go in and like rescue their younger selves
Yeah.
as an adult now, and they take the responsibility for the well-being of themselves. They take it back, and
Mhm.
then they'll create like a new experience.
Yeah.
That can be one way that I've had people I really like shed a lot through yeah, there and just shifting. I think that there's so much of it like in traditional therapy, there's often like a going over the story many times, and I know that that can be valuable. It can also kind of keep somebody stuck in a narrative about themselves. Like what I have noticed in myself and others is that we are actually innately really regenerative as human beings. Like our ability to heal, like physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, like it's phenomenal. And I've experienced it in all of those ways personally, like phenomenal physical healing, all kinds of things. I'm growing a new tooth, for example.
You
um,
did?
I am have an adult. adult canine coming in. It's really
That's
great.
amazing.
But so yeah, I think a big part of it is just like allowing people to step out of this story that they have about themselves. Like people tend to really take those experiences on as like, this is who I am. And when they're finished doing that kind of work with me, it's almost like they are like, wow, did that really even happen? Or like, is that like, they know that it happened and they know it's real,
Yeah.
but they've been able to step out of that being super like sticky or having such a grip on them. Yeah.
It's super helpful because we can spend years in therapy and maybe make like a little bit of progress, but not fully clear trauma. So I love the work, like I got really into somatics like last year and I was reading all the books and um just even doing some of the exercises on my own helped me clear a massive amount of trauma that I had been dealing with for years. So it really does work and it's super, super powerful. And I can only imagine how much more powerful it is when you have a facilitator to like guide you through that.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It is really powerful because you're actually just rewiring your, I shouldn't say just, you're rewiring your nervous system, right? So it's like, take a deep breath, say that sentence again. Like it's really actually quite phenomenal. I have loved receiving that and I love being able to take people through it because I'm also not shy of like I've worked with people who've experienced intense trauma and they're describing it and I'm like I can feel so much empathy for what they went through and it's also not too much for me to hear or be with and I think I didn't realize that was like a gift until I started to have people reflect like wow it was really beautiful to be held through that without you adopting a story about me either, you know, or
Yeah,
like deciding that I was really fragile or whatever they were used to experiencing.
that's amazing. That's so one of your posts, you say your loyalty to others is not genuine loyalty if it means overriding your loyalty to yourself. Instead, it becomes a bargaining tool. Could you expand on this?
Yeah, for sure. It's actually something that I observe a lot in clients who have experienced a lot of trauma or growing up in a home where like love was conditional or all of that and so people don't have a sense of like I don't think you can be truly loyal to anyone else if you're not truly loyal to yourself and being loyal to yourself also requires knowing who you are and having that like self sovereignty where you're um, you know what's right for you and you're okay with being like this is what's right for me even if it means um, being in a disagreement with someone really close to you and I was reflecting on this actually with a friend the other day of how like often I notice in friendships can be like female friendships or many different relationships people are looking for like this checklist of do we have are we the same? Are we the same? You know, I noticed a lot when my kids were little, if I'd go to like a mom and tot group and it'd be like, do you breastfeed and did you home birth? And, you know, I felt like I was being interviewed for like a job or something. And like that stuff really doesn't matter to me in a friendship. What I'm looking for is does this person know who they are? Are they loyal to themselves? Do they have the emotional depth that I require for like I really love relationships that have a lot of intimacy, emotional intimacy. I don't really have any friends where that's not
Yeah.
present, where we can share and experience each other's hearts. Like I love that. And
Mhm.
but that does require, you know, knowing who you are and being comfortable being like, you know what, actually I'm not gonna come out tonight. I just want to stay home and that being fine. And I see how where people yeah, I mean it's very normalized in our culture too to be loyal to like an ideology or a trend or
Yeah.
you know a family member or this that or the other without actually being loyal to yourself and that's I
Mhm.
guess part of the deeper purpose of the work I'm here to do is I dream of like living in a society or just a group of people who are really like self-authored and know who they are, because that to me is the strongest, most vital, vibrant
Yeah.
uh, society. So there's that's kind of a tangent, but yeah, for sure.
No, it's so true. It's like the sovereignty,
Mhm.
like having personal sovereignty. And I feel like people do get so swept up in what their religion is telling them or what their coach is telling them or what their political party is telling them. And that can shift wildly. Like, no, I don't really want to get into politics here, but like the political party affiliations, what they stand for has like wildly shifted in the past few years, and people are still just going along with whatever
Mhm.
they believe themselves to be. And it's like, you need to like think critically about this because this isn't what you guys were saying in the 60s, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's, I mean, that's a perfect one. That's just, another like box that people try to put each other in. I personally, like, I don't vote, I don't follow politics. I think the whole thing's kind of like a puppet show, fairly
Yeah.
fake.
Yeah.
But, that's me. But often I'll meet people and they'll make assumptions based on my life choices that
Mhm.
I would be insert here, whatever. And I just think it's
Yeah.
funny.
Mhm. It
But
is. It's so interesting. Like you said, like being interviewed for a job and people want to know, like, well, what do you think about this and this and this, instead of just being a real human growing person that can, who knows? Who knows?
Mhm.
Maybe this time you had a home birth and next time you have a free birth, or like, yeah, like we keep
Yeah.
changing, and who we are now isn't necessarily who we're always going to be.
Yeah, it's so true. I wonder about this, and I mean, I'd be curious to know if you ever think about it too, but I sometimes wonder if human beings have always been this caught up in like ideology. Like, I feel like so much of the time we're living in right now is like ideological warfare, like this
Yeah.
need to like, we're part of this and we believe in this. And like, I don't know, I don't remember that being such a big thing when I was a child, but maybe I just wasn't aware of it. I wonder if there were times in history where that wasn't taking up so much of a human being's
Yeah.
brain space. There are a lot of things happening in the world right now that I'm aware that I'm like, I actually don't even want to focus on those things or think about them. Like, I just don't want that to take up room in my brain, So,
It's the first time in history that we've had access to this much information. Like we're being bombarded with information. I think I forget exactly what the numbers were, but it was basically like we take in more information in a day than somebody before the internet took in like a year, because we're exposed to all of it. And so I think that might be a part of it, is just people trying to find like where they fit in with everything. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't think it's healthy though. I think
Mhm.
when we lived in communities and, your sphere of influence was so much smaller.
Mhm.
So maybe
Yeah.
you weren't being influenced by the outside world as much. You were influenced by your own, like who you were and probably your family and your community, but not
Mhm.
the entire world.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and also influenced in a way that's more like grounded in reality rather than like online uh, thoughts being shared that aren't
Mhm.
also backed with like, oh, I that person said that thing, and I also see how they show up in the real world or interact with the lady in the grocery store. These things that are actually important parts of our social makeup or social imprinting that aren't there when you're interacting online. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast a while back, and he was talking about how the things that people say, the people are cruel to each other on the internet, and they say things to people that they disagree with that you would never say to somebody in person ever in a million years. But you have like the safety of like being slightly anonymous on the internet and just like battling back and forth, and it's the
Mhm.
most extreme voices that get shared and like that people see over and over and over again. So it really is an artificial environment.
Mhm. Yeah, very much so.
So I really want to dive into your thoughts on polarity, because that is what really drew me to you in the first place, is just seeing some of your like gentle critiques of some of the polarity teachers that have gotten quite dogmatic and like really rulesy. Um so you were talking about how you were saying polarity is something innate and embodied instinctual and held within your DNA, not necessarily whatever someone who labels themselves as a polarity coach or expert decrees it to be. When your instincts are online, this will feel very different than what you feel when you want a playbook, a cheat sheet, or a way of talking that is supposed to make you more masculine or more feminine. Can we talk a little bit more about this?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. It's such a huge subject, but um yeah, I guess the main like theme in there, what I have observed is that when people are connected to their instincts, which granted we're in a time where most people are leading lives where you're fairly disconnected from instincts, disconnected from nature, all of that. But when people are connected to their instincts, there's this natural polarity that shows up. It actually, I notice it a lot when I teach children's dance classes, especially children who are growing up in like a relatively wholesome home environment. There's a natural polarity. Like the little boys are naturally protective and caring and like wanting to lead. Like that's all there for them. And then the the girls are like naturally like really in their feels. Like I remember noticing it one day, this one girl who she was like 4 at the time, like every dance class, like how she was feeling was known to everyone. And it wasn't a burden. She was really clean about it, but she was just like really like, oh, I'm so tired. Like just like I was like, wow, she's got feminine communication down, this girl, like she can knock it out of the park. But yeah, just noticing that when people are connected to their instincts, there is this natural dynamic between men and women that's like, of course men are stronger than us, of course we are more vulnerable and the weaker of the two, like, and of
Mhm.
course we have very different things that we're bringing to the table, or that we're bringing to each other,
Yeah.
that I often go back to thinking about like prehistoric or like hunter gatherer times. Like I try to imagine what our lives would have been like, because when the when your survival needs are a bigger part of your awareness, I think it's easier to stay connected to your instincts and easier to have a like natural polarity happening. And also having been a mom and been vulnerable in pregnancy and birth and breastfeeding, like these experiences that are what your instincts, for me, my instincts were super online in those experiences. And the polarity in my relationship with my husband, we're not together anymore, my ex-husband now, that those were always the times in our relationship where it was most present, and at that point I'd never even heard the word polarity till a few years ago, or the whole like philosophy of it. I was like, oh, this is really interesting.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that when people get into like a study of it, or like using this way of talking, or um, trying to create an identity for themselves
Yeah.
that makes them more feminine or makes them more masculine, when these things are like they're instinctual, like simple things like holding the door. As a woman, I always will hold the door for somebody older than me, or like a woman carrying a toddler, or and it's these are like, these are all things that I think our brain, I'm not a scientist obviously, but like I think there's an animal part of our brain that tracks these things,
Mhm.
that's just like, if your instincts are online, it's like you can't not do those things. It's like, when I go out with friends, there's always like the guy who's like, I'm gonna walk you to your car. And he's not trying to be masculine. It's literally like breathing for him. It would be hard not to walk me to the car. That's like instincts, it's innate, it's just there. It's not like this intellectual thing. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, or we're just like
No, you
riffing.
totally did. Totally did. It's a wonderful answer. My other business is I'm a massage therapist, and I have a lot of older clients. Most of my clients are 65 and up, retired, grandkids. And a lot of them very happily married. And I always ask, like, I'm like, what's the secret? And it's very interesting because they've never heard the word polarity either. They grew up in like a completely different generation, but they naturally have like very polarized relationship dynamics. And it's just like clear from the way that they talk about their relationship. And it is so interesting because it's like before we all got conditioned away from our instincts, relationships worked a lot better. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of the work, it's like, it's not, I coach women on this and like feminine dating and stuff. And a lot of the questions are like, how do I be more feminine? And it's like, it's really more of like, how do you decondition yourself from trying to be masculine like you were
Mhm.
taught? And once what's left is your femininity, like that's who you naturally are. So I love how you were saying too, like when you're following a script laid out by like your polarity coach for how to communicate, you're having a woman get into her head, which is the opposite of what feminine communication is, which is coming from an embodied place. And you could use any words from that place and it would come across as feminine communication, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, that watching that part, like I watched women, like clients I was working with, um, people in like these communities, larger communities, it became like another layer of their like masculinized identity where they were like, now I have this all these tools to communicate a certain way, and not necessarily consciously, but they were using them in a very manipulative way to get an outcome, which is ironic because that's essentially what their teaching is, that feminine communication is not about getting an outcome. But as soon as you jump into your head
Mhm.
and you're thinking about how, and this is what I noticed was like the women were thinking about what they, how to say it, and they would get so twisted up in knots and like shrink and like become kind of like a shadow of themselves, like all kinds of
Mhm.
not good things were happening. And at the same time, I would hear stories that were also experienced firsthand, men who were like, "You're not speaking to me in a feminine way. This is disrespectful." And I'm like, even like as a man saying that phrase, like "you're not respecting me," like it's not instinctual masculinity online in that moment, right? And so it was like creating this another thing to like battle over that was taking people further away from their instincts. And that's when I was like, okay, this is um not healthy. And I think that's just it, is like learning a communication script. Well, you can understand how there's like value in that, or for some people they would feel it in their body. They're like, oh wow, yeah, I do actually feel more relaxed in my body. But I really love what you said about like when you're coaching women and they want to know like how to be more feminine, like even just that phrase, it's like ironic, right? Like you can't be more feminine. It's like you say, it's about stripping things away, and um yeah, I was laughing one day about like the phrase mastering feminine communication, because mastery itself is a masculine task. And I was just like, this is hilarious, but yeah, that's,
It
and
is
also, pardon.
there's and there is value. I think there is value in like saying, here's an example of feminine communication, here's what it could possibly look like. But what
Mhm,
I've seen a lot of women do is like literally take the script and repeat. And it's like, you sound crazy. No one talks like that. Like
mhm,
you have to get into your body and then say it the way you would say it.
mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the danger, I think, is that like putting a also like some of those things, phrases that I would see people, suggesting that women say, if
Mhm.
if they don't actually feel that,
Yeah.
well, now you've created like dishonesty and all kinds of other things. Whereas if you're, yeah,
And
it's
then
an,
a lot of judgment from like the people in the community that abide by these polarity rules. Anybody that doesn't do it exactly the way they do, well, they're not polarized and their relationship isn't going to work. And eventually they'll break up. Just watch. Like that's so toxic.
Mhm. Yeah, yes, and that like judgment of um like uh feminine femininity or masculinity being judged on a scale where like I would hear people in those groups say like, oh, she's really feminine, or he's really in his masculine, like creating this hierarchy. Was like, wow, do you want to talk about how that actually is impacting women in your community who are now like comparing themselves to, oh, that's what, as though there's like a cookie cutter
Yeah.
um, template for this is being feminine, right? Like, which is, it actually, like, after I sat with it for a while, I was like, wow, there's actually this very juvenile or like immature approach, and a low level understanding of feminine energy, right? Like feminine energy is really diverse, multidimensional, chaotic, wild. Like it has all these different
Yeah.
experiences to it. Even like a woman throughout 28 days, she's going to go through many different um, experiences or ways of showing up in life if
Yeah.
she's allowing herself to. If she's not like, oh, I got to show up like a man, it's going to be different, and that. So I think I experience like a sadness of watching people look for that cheat sheet rather than understanding that union between men and women is, in my opinion, it's about creating a deeper relationship with God and experiencing divinity through each other. And part of that is this like awe and um, admiration for, respect of the other. Like when I really look at the masculine experience and what it is to be a man, like I have like cried about it, where I'm just like, wow, like I am in awe, and I'm very thankful it's not my path because I'm not cut out for it. And
Yeah.
I'm like very thankful of our differences and of honoring that. I go and train jujitsu almost every day. It's mostly men. There are a few other women. And I think part of that was my subconscious mind wanting to be reminded of like an environment where men really get to be in their masculine energy.
Mm.
Um, but that like all in appreciation of our differences, and also the sacredness of like, you don't
Yeah.
need to know everything about the feminine experience, or I don't need to know everything about the masculine experience. Like there are things that are separate. And that, I guess, again, it was like the sadness that I was experiencing was like watching people look for something outside of themselves that was like, here, if you follow this way of communicating, you're going to bulletproof your relationship, rather than being like, here's this person who I love deeply and have committed to walking through life with, and we're going to like have faith and trust and belief in each other and in our hearts and in God. And like, I don't know if I'm expressing what I
Oh,
feel well, but it's like,
yeah,
yeah.
it's so much deeper. And it's like you said, we're not only do we go through different phases in 28 days, like over a lifetime with somebody, there's going to be different seasons and like there's going to be different dynamics at play. And if you can just come to it with respect and a willingness to like let him be a man and let yourself be a woman, and even if you just have that intention and you believe that he ultimately loves to make you happy and loves to lead you, like you can have a great relationship, like just with the intention to do so, basically. Like you don't have to have, you don't even, you can even mess it up. You can mess it up a lot and you can still have a great relationship over a lifetime.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about your older massage clients, and just like I think about that too. Like when I've talked to older people who've lived through, like you're speaking to, like multiple different, if you think about how much you've changed as an individual through your life, like 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, and then moving forward into the future. Yeah, I think I also just coming from a generation where things weren't disposable, right? It wasn't like, and next. It was like, oh, we're going to sort this out. And and really, yeah, when you speak to people like that, they're like, yeah, I've been married like one person my whole life, but I've had like 10 different marriages. Like it's evolved many times and had different seasons. I mean, when you're in like raising young children or like all these different seasons of our lives, it's like, but
Yeah.
yeah.
One of my clients who I was the most inspired by was sharing with me that she's like, me and my husband just never fought. Like we were just best friends and we didn't really see, not that they never disagreed, but just they never really had a fight. And she's like, there were phases in our life where we were raising the kids and we were working, and sometimes it was like we were ships passing in the night, but that was just a phase. And she's like more in love with him than ever. And I've heard women say, like, very happily lifelong married women say, like, it's a lifetime of falling apart and coming back together. Like there's like this fluidity and this like, I guess like when you have the container that you're in it for the long haul, there's so much room to just be in that.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. There is that. Um, yeah, again, the sacredness of that. It's funny, like I'm thinking about the irony of personally being someone who deeply believes in marriage and also ended up getting divorced. Like I often think about the irony of that because for me it was like a forever thing and definitely lived through like we were together for 18 years and just all the different layers of our relationship. But I do think that, even one of the things that I love, when people write those posts of like 5 things to never say in an argument or like those kind of posts, and like one of them being like, don't bring up divorce, even if you're um, in a joking way, or,
Yeah.
what I mean? I think there is that element of like, okay, we chose this and we'll get through whatever is there.
Mhm.
And that certainly was my approach the last few years of my marriage. I was like, we'll get through this, and then eventually we didn't. But
It does take both. I mean, nothing's perfect and it does take both people. And there's
Mhm.
a lot we can do as women, but we can't do the whole thing on our own.
Yeah, yeah, and also I think like going back to your older clients, I think people were also living in a time where like sacred relationships were more supported by the people around us. That's something that I really like. I would love to get married again someday, and I'm really cognizant of like I have people in my life who are the guardians of that. They are the guardians of my heart.
Mhm.
They're men, women, friends, family, people who really I know that they are people in my life who support that. And I do think that most optimally um, couples have that in their lives where they have like a team, a council, other people who are supporting them. There are things as men that are really good if you can go to your brothers and talk it through and not necessarily bring that to your wife. And same thing with women. Like we have such a desire. I mean, I personally have such a desire for like a certain type of like emotional conversation that I'm really thankful to have my girlfriends for that too, like and then there's of course the overlap and the where you connect as well. But um I know that's like a desire that I have for my children, myself, my friends, clients is like to not just be in your relationship as two people, but to have the genuine support of others that does require a level of maturity and honoring of sacred union, you know?
It is a big piece. The support of a community and the support of like multiple generations is something that's desperately needed and mostly missing in our society right now. But I think that there is a movement back towards that. And we will need to have a lot of people on board. Like, I don't know many women. I was just thinking about this today of how it used to be like when you had a baby, like your mom would come and stay with you for like a month and take care of you. And I don't know any of my friends where like that was their experience, or if they would even want their mother there. But I feel like in previous generations, there was kind of just like this expectation that like there were older women, there were younger women, there was just a lot of support and an expectation that, like you said, like you would have a community of support even around your union, and people, like, you didn't just break up, and there were ways like people to talk to and ways to work through things. So
Yeah, there definitely that. I mean, I remember I gave birth to my oldest son, I was 19, and I was like, "Wow, I am the first woman I've seen go through this." How
yeah,
weird is that, right? Like, there was a time where as a young woman growing up, you would have seen other women give birth. I mean, my oldest son watched his 3 younger brothers be born, like, he's got more
yeah,
awareness than most people, but yeah, and through all of that, through all the seasons of, again, like for men having other men in their lives who they can share, like, this is going on in my relationship, men who can actually like hold that and give honest reflection, call each other up, and same with women, when you have like a group of women and you kind of can see like, oh, like that friend's relationship is really blossoming right now, like they're really in the like really in love with each other, and like that friend is like, oh, they're like working through some hard things, but you start to sort of also have that zoomed out view of like, okay, this is life, this is a human experience, we all have moments where we're like in grief or in
yeah.
joy or like all of it at the same time, you know. But yeah, I do think that having that is important, and it wasn't something that was present for me as a young woman getting married. I really actually pushed my family away a lot as a teenager and young woman. And now now like I was just thinking about it today, this morning, like what am I most thankful for in my life? And one of the things is like my middle son is living with my dad and my stepmother right now, working with my dad. I worked with my dad around the same age. My other two sons have both worked with my dad, and it's just so nice knowing he's there. Like he was like a couple months ago, he's like, I really got to get to know my grandfather. Like, I need to get to know that guy. And my dad was like, when's he coming up? I like could use his help. Like, want to hang out with him. You know, get to know him better. And then also my youngest son lately has been like calling his grandma just to like chat with her. And I noticed for me as a single mom, I'm like, wow, there's like this weight that lifts off me, or I'm like, oh, I do have
Yeah.
all this support. And I've been like learning to actually um, share more with my family and be like my dad, my stepmother, my mom, like actually let them know what's going on. Like, oh, these people have so much wisdom. Go figure, you
No,
know?
isn't it wild? Like,
Yeah.
I know. I definitely, well, I think there's a big shift happening in society, but definitely as I get older, I appreciate more and more certain things about the way that I was, certainly it wasn't perfect, but certain things about the way I was raised. And like, yeah, it's so interesting. It's also interesting how much support we do have available to us and how long it took me at least to like let that in.
Yes, 100%. I feel like that's been one of the areas of greatest growth for me in the past few years, is like really letting people in, and letting people in when everything is falling apart, and
Yeah.
not waiting until I'm like back in a place of like feeling confident or having it all figured out, but letting people in when I'm like most vulnerable, like calling friends in tears, crying in front of my mom, like things that I had not done before as an adult, you know, and just it's been amazing what's happening where suddenly like, oh, I'm not alone. I have all these people who are supporting me, and letting that in, I honestly believe is a really huge part of all these different things that are happening in my life, or that are preparing me for the like marriage that I want to experience. And I remember having this moment where it was like a really big part of our relationship, like our sacred union of marriage, is about also having all the relationships in our lives having this like quality that I was wanting, and suddenly that's present in my life. Like even in relationships where I never thought it would be present, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so good with this person, and like the communication is open and the heart is there, and it's really beautiful. Like just watching the evolution of everyone around me is like, I don't know,
Yeah.
very cool. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. So, when it comes to feminine communication, do you guide your clients to get in touch with their feelings and express them in a certain way? Or do you more just let that unfold naturally as a result of your work?
Well, this is such a great question. And I love, so one thing that I have found really, really impactful for my clients is if they can, there's something that they're feeling upset about and they can talk to me about it
Yeah.
and I can guide them through their feelings. So, like, one of the biggest things about feminine communication and all of that is actually for women to have the capacity to be with their feelings, which for a lot of women that's not there. And so if they can have that experience with me of being guided through like what they're feeling, being safe with what they're feeling, expressing it, being real about it. Like a lot of women will express sadness is more comfortable than anger, for example, or rage, generally speaking. And then after that, they, often at the end of the call, I'm like, okay, can you now go and communicate this to your partner? And usually what happens is because they've been able to do it there's like less at stake with me because I'm just their coach, that there's then like room for them to go express that to their partner, or their husband or boyfriend. And yes, I will give them some tools of like simple one being like a really great way to start those conversations is to share like, hey, there's something I'm actually having a really hard time talking about.
Mhm.
Um, like, would this be a good time? So that you're like and that's good with anybody, your husband, your boyfriend, doesn't matter, like your business partner, your best girlfriend, like with anyone, like, hey, like letting them know that you're having a hard time communicating about something or there's something that you have a lot of emotion or feeling around, and like, is this a good time, which then allows them to decide like that they
Yeah.
have capacity to be there for you through that experience or not. So I will give some um guidelines like that or examples of expressing your feelings without blaming or shaming
Yeah.
is just and even just practicing it like when they're talking to me, and then I'll ask them back like, how does it feel if you say it like this? Because the thing about communication, whether it's masculine or feminine, is that we've learned a lot of ways to communicate that are somewhat sloppy or messy, or
Yeah.
it is something that we can upgrade if we want to. And
Like,
that,
make
and
you feel like that's
yeah,
it's not
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
And
And
it's so
yet that's
easy to
how,
fall into that.
pardon me.
It's so easy to fall into that. To like say, you did this or you made me feel this way or whatever, like putting it on the other person. I feel like it's like almost ingrained.
Well, yeah, and that's where it's ingrained, it's very common. And so there, and it does for most of us, myself 100%, there's an effort involved in changing that and having other people reflect or, you know, providing like a mirror or an awareness of how I'm communicating.
Mm,
Just, and it's, I mean, there are many examples of even things like I have to do this thing today, and changing that to I get to do this thing today, or I chose to do this, or I'm excited to do this thing today. Even, like simple things like that that aren't necessarily masculine or feminine communication, but just
yeah.
how our society at large uses the language, and then shifting into communicating in a way that is going to send different messages to your body, right? Of like, I get to do this thing today, So,
Yeah.
anyways, yeah,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Our words are so powerful.
yeah.
So with the communicating with the masculine, um, and I think you when you were talking about this of saying like, is this a good time? Like I have this is and I love that the vulnerability of like there's something that's difficult for me to talk about. Um, but one of the things that Alison Armstrong talks about, who I don't know if you know her, but I just love her work. But she talks about how men are single focused. So if they're watching TV and you just start talking to them, they can't even hear you. It's not that they're ignoring you or that like they don't care about what you have to say. It's that they can't they are focusing on watching sports and you're over here, and it's like you may as well not even be there because they can't focus on two things at once. And another thing she said is that when a woman is listening to someone talking, she could be like washing the dishes and taking care of the baby and making the dinner and listening, but a man can't. So he'll take that as like you're not really listening to him because you didn't stop what you were doing and just focus on what he was saying. So just like little, like understanding like the little differences that we have, and that it's not personal, and like we don't need to take it personally. We just understand how to like work with each other. It's so powerful.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful one. Like it's just such a simple example of how different men and women are. Like I personally find it easier to listen if I am moving. Like I near the end of high school, I was like asking my teachers if I could stand at the back of class and like stretch because I would absorb more.
Mhm.
And but yeah, if you don't have that awareness and then you're talking to him while he's watching TV or whatever, and then you feel like he's ignoring you, all these are really helpful things of understanding like just how our brains work differently and why, right? I mean, if you're a woman and you're like caring for a child and doing all these different things, like we're great for that, and but men are like much more single task focused, like you put it. Yeah, that's I think, and when with that in awareness, people can create much more like respectful or harmonious or productive ways of interacting or communicating with each other rather than just having these like really disorganized conversations that don't lead to change and they don't understand. They're like, we've talked about it. Like, well, how are you talking to each other? Because there is a benefit in understanding that for sure.
Yeah, so powerful. Let me see what else I wrote down. I feel like we covered a lot of the stuff on polarity that I wanted to ask you. Um, I love what you said it's like watching a relationship become a multi-car pile up on the that was so good. I was like, yes.
It's funny how people really liked that line. I had a private client like message me just specifically about that line, and I had just moved from a small town where we don't have a highway. I just moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where I'm like driving on the highway every day. So I in my yeah, I do, yeah.
It's too fun.
Oh, really? Oh, that's so cool. We could have like just met up and done this in person.
In person. But if it counts a grand.
That's so cool. Yeah, that would have been fun. But yeah, it was like such an adjustment to city living, and I noticed my analogies changed. So yeah, multi-car pileup was, but yeah, I think that um, I don't. I had multiple clients like when they first discovered the concepts of polarity. It was like so many of the problems that they were experiencing in their relationship were suddenly like illuminated really well. Like I had one client describe it as like hitting a brick wall. Like he was just like he was in shock for like a week, and then
Yeah.
he started to like make shifts and they're definitely, I think, when you start to recognize that a lot of problems people are experiencing in relationships are just because they're trying to speak how they'd want to be spoken to, or how, you know, like where they're just not aware of how the other person's operating system works, being such a big part of it. um yeah, and then for many clients, like realizing that for years and years and years they haven't been honoring their feminine instincts or honoring their masculine instincts. It can be like this one client put it really well, like hitting a brick wall. Like he was just like his whole life like rearranged in that moment, you know.
It definitely changes things dramatically, understanding it. Like I you can like I can look back on my entire relationship history and see why so many things didn't work before I understood. Because women are conditioned in our culture to be very much in their masculine. Like everyone's kind of, well, now I don't know. There's like a lot of push towards men being more like in touch with their emotions, and but just speaking for women, there is this big conditioning to be very masculine. And
Mhm.
so when we bring that into our relationships, we're like, well, why doesn't it work? It works it works at the gym, it works at the office. Like, why doesn't it work in my relationships? And it's like, well, because unless you want to be, and there's nothing wrong with this, like if you want to be with a very feminized man, then your masculine energy will be great. But most women actually want to be with a masculine leader, protector, provider, but they don't know how to step into the feminine role. So it can be, just understanding it can completely change your life.
Mhm. Yeah, and understanding that, like, I watch a lot of women go through like a almost like a grieving process where they're like, I think about even just how we're really culturally like programmed to um I remember in high school being super praised for like academic achievement and accolades, and that being the focus, and even having like people in my family be like, you got to be a doctor or a lawyer with a brain like that. And my own journey of essentially like healing from that and realizing that I don't my like I remember my youngest son one day was like laughing at me because I couldn't remember something, or like I'm not very tech savvy, and he was like, do you ever wish you were like as smart as me or dad? And I was like, oh, I love that he asked this question, and I just burst out laughing. My heart was like so wide open. And I was like, no, I don't wish that at all. And it's such a relief to
Mhm.
acknowledge that. Like, I'm totally fine with you guys being able to remember facts
Yeah.
and things that I actually can't. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a feminine quality, it's just like a me quality, but I don't have a huge desire to like know all the things or have all the facts. I'm much more interested in like what I'm experiencing in my feeling body. And that's really different, just to be at peace with that.
Do you want to just share like how we can find you? And then we'll
Yeah,
try
for
to wrap
sure.
it up.
Totally. So,
All
first of all,
right.
thank you so much for having me. Um, this has been a really beautiful conversation to have, and I look forward to just continuing to follow your message and what you're sharing, and see how others are coming home to their own like instincts. And um, how you can find me, I am on Facebook and Instagram, Veronika Illiana, at either of those. And feel free to send me a message on either of those apps, um, and introduce yourself, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It was a total pleasure and an honor to be
Thank
here.
you. Thank you so much, Veronica. This has been amazing. I really appreciate it. And I'll put the link to your Instagram in the show notes so that people can follow you and plug into your work. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Bye.
Bye.